Good morning all. We will continue with the second session today. Hope you all are very clear, understanding the basic concepts the last class. So we will move to the next topic today, which is essential elements of valid contract. So what do you mean by essential? Essential means what are all the requirements, clear requirements for a contract. When you say clear requirements for a contract, these are all absolutely needed for an agreement to mature. Mature means convert into a contract. First point, if you see, it is offer and acceptance. The offer and acceptance, as I said, is equal to agreement. A is equal to O plus A. Right? Agreement is equal to offer plus acceptance. When you say, as I said, A wishes to sell his car to B for 1 lakh. Now, the subject matter of the offer is called car. A is the offerer who offers. B is the offeree who buys the product, car. Car is the subject matter of the offer. Therefore, the agreement is covering all these parties. One is offerer A, offeree B, subject matter car, price 1 lakh. Maybe there will be additional things like the time and the place where the agreement is to be executed. That will be part and parcel of the agreement. The second part of it is acceptance. Acceptance always have to be absolute and unqualified. When you say acceptance, here in this side, A tells to B that I am going to sell my car to you for 1 lakh, as I said. Now, B has to accept as it is, because A is not saying any condition to be fulfilled by B. A is not saying anything to B. He says, I am willing to sell my car to you for 1 lakh. Now, B has to accept the car for 1 lakh, that's it. Or he can reject the offer. It is up to him. Either accept it or reject it. Rejection may be due to various reasons, like he may not have funds, he may not like the car that A is offering, the color of the car may not be there, the feature of the car may not be suited to be, etc. Various reasons. So either he may accept it or reject it. Right? So that is what is the difference. So when you say offer and acceptance is a basic terminology. These are the things which are essential to form an agreement. Second part of it is consensus added. As I said already, the basic rule which is called the Kamal-Hans and Rajhans case, where I already told you that A is the owner of Kamal-Hans, which is one of the horses, and B is another person who is the buyer of the horses. So now Kamal-Hans and Rajhans are the two major horses which A has. He is thinking of selling Kamal-Hans, whereas B is thinking of buying Rajhans. What A thinks and B thinks are totally different. Obviously, there is no consensus ad item. Consensus ad item means like-mindedness of the parties. As I said yesterday, it is like-mindedness of the parties. So, consensus ad item is one of the essential elements and requirements for an agreement to mature into the contract. Therefore, consensus ad item is very, very important. Unless there is consensus ad item, there can be no contract, even no agreement at all. Right? So this is the second part of it. If A and B, both of them as seller and the buyer, must accept the terms and conditions of the contract, the subject matter of the contract should be both equal for both A and B. If A is selling one thing, B is buying another thing, or is thinking of buying another thing, there is nothing, there is no agreement at all, there is no contract at all. A and B must agree to the subject matter, which should be one and the same. It should be equal. The subject matter of the same, the subject matter of the purchasing, both should be the same. Then only A and B are in like-mindedness. Then only A and B are in unique thing. Right? That is the second part of it. Third is lawful consideration. As I said, condition is always something in return. So in the instant case, let us take the same example. A is selling his car to B for 1 lakh. B is buying A's car. Therefore, A is the seller and B is the buyer. Now what happens is, if A is selling his car to B for 1 lakh, for B he is getting the car. For A he is getting 1 lakh money from B. Therefore, both of them stand to exchange the products for money. Right? So A is exchanging his product for money and B is exchanging his money for a product. Therefore, both of them stand to gain from the transaction. In a consideration in the essential element of contract is one of the important aspects, because in consideration or being the part of agreement, nobody should only stand to gain, nobody should only stand to lose. Both of them should gain from the contract. There should not be any sacrifice without gaining another thing. If I sacrifice without gaining another, or if the other person sacrifices without gaining anything, there is nothing in the agreement. There is no such sacrifices at all validly acceptable or recognizable by law. I should sacrifice, instead I should get something. The other person should sacrifice, instead he should get something. So, something in return is consideration. Another part of consideration is that consideration should be valuable, it should be measurable. For example, if I am going to sell my car to B, it is not a value statement. I am going to sell my car to B for 1 lakh. So you are adding value in terms of money, making the money worth for the subject matter of the contract, which is car. My car is worth 90,000, I am selling it for 1 lakh. Maybe I will sell it for a profit of 10,000. That is okay, that is entirely up to me. But the entire sale of the car is 1 lakh, the price money. Therefore, the price money of 1 lakh is the price or the value that I fix for my car. B is ready to pay me 1 lakh. I am ready to deliver my car to B. Therefore, there is a mutual agreement between the parties. And the value is fixed for the car. And the value which is measurable is called the consideration. The most important part of consideration is that it should be always lawful. I cannot always have an unlawful consideration. For example, if I am going to let out my house, I am the owner of the property, I am going to let out my house on a rental basis to B for 50,000 rupees rent. Okay, but my house which is going to be used by B for residential purpose, I am okay. But if B is going to use my house for smuggling purpose, entirely for smuggling purpose, or for drinking purpose, or for any other illegal activities, then probably the objective of letting out the house is not legal. Therefore, as a owner, I will be held responsible. As a tenant is doing smuggling or illegal activities, he will be responsible. Therefore, the letting out of the house for a rental purpose and the usage of the purpose should be lawful. If I am letting out the house for 50,000 rupees consideration, but the purpose of me letting out is something which is unlawful, which I may or may not know, but again the tenant is using it for unlawful purposes or illegal purposes, the purpose of the consideration is unlawful. Therefore, contract becomes void and is not valid or legally recognizable. Then comes capacity to contract. The fourth important element is capacity to contract. What do you mean by capacity to contract? Capacity means the legal capability. If I am going to enter into a contract, I must be a person who should not be three of these. So if we come to capacity to contract, it is always a normal rule. Generally, under law, there will be always an exception to the main rule. Main rule will always be there. But there are always cases where we need to provide for exceptions, because everybody cannot strictly comply with the law. There can be exceptions because of the old age or because of some other legal capacity, because of some other extraordinary circumstances. We have to somewhat circumstances force us to not follow the law, but we will be in tune with the law, but there will be certain exceptions. What are all the exceptions? First is minor. Second is persons of unsound mind. Third is disqualifications. Yesterday I said here, minor is a person where he is less than 18 years of age. Any person is less than 18 years of age, as per Indian Majority Act, there is an act called Indian Majority Act, which says that a person below 18 years of age cannot be a person who is competent to enter into a contract. Person only above 18 years of age will be entered into a contract. Whereas under Guardian and the Wards Act, there is a Guardian and the Wards Act, which is applicable as per the Indian legal legislation, where it says that persons above 21 years of age will be persons who is majority. This 18 years is for normal persons. This limit of 21 years is in the case of a guardian who is taking care of minor. Where a minor is taken care by guardian appointed for this purpose by the court. In this case, the guardian is appointed by the court under the Wards Act. In that case, the minor age is 21. Otherwise, the majority age is only 18. Whereas in the case of a guardian appointed by the court for taking care of the minor, then minor attains majority at the completion of 21 years and not 18 years. Where guardian is appointed, majority age is 21. Other cases, majority age is 18 years. Then comes persons of unsound mind. What is persons of unsound mind? Lunatic, idiots, and drunken persons, intoxicated persons who are doing some kind of any injection into the body, like any intoxicated material or medicines, and they are entering into contract. They cannot be able to understand the rationale behind the contract, the purpose of the contract. They are not able to understand give a meaning to the contract. Therefore, these persons are called drunken and intoxicated persons. Drunken persons, obviously, in Tamil Nadu there are various, not only in Tamil Nadu, across India there are various shops like Tasmark, etc., where people are used to having drinking in these shops, and they are under the influence of drugs and drunken liquids. So they will not be able to enter into the contract at the time of having the liquids and those kind of drunken material, etc. So those persons cannot enter into a contract at the time they are drunken, because they are not able to understand the terms and conditions of the contract. Next is disqualified persons. What is disqualified persons? Under the law, there are certain people who are completely disqualified. They cannot enter into the contract. The person who has killed a person and is gone to the jail, then he is said to have committed a crime. He cannot enter into the contract. We call that person as convicted. C-O-N-V-I-C-T, convicted. Second is foreign ambassador. The person who comes from the foreign, but on behalf of him, he is representing a person. That person is called a foreign ambassador. Insolvent person. The person doesn't have any money, or person doesn't have any property, or is not legally capable of owning anything. That person is called insolvent person. Companies and corporations, though they are legal persons, but under the law they are not entered, they are not qualified persons. We call it as corporations, those kind of stuff. So there are certain, these are the major categories of people who are termed as an exception to the rule capacity to the contract. Other than these set of people, I think the rest of the people are very capacitated to enter into the contract. These are the exceptions. Minor cannot enter into the contract, persons of unsound mind cannot enter into the contract, and disqualified persons cannot enter into the contract. Next is free consent. The next rule is free consent. When you come to free consent, what do you mean by consent? Consent means I agree upon the terms and conditions of the contract in the same manner, in the same time, same place, and in the same sense. I give my willingness to enter into the contract. So, if I understand the terms and conditions of the contract imposed by the seller, then buyer will also give his willingness to purchase the product. If the seller is not able to express, or in case he is ready to sell this product, but he is forcing the buyer to buy this product, then there will be a problem. The buyer and the seller should be free. Neither the seller should force the buyer, or the buyer should force the seller to sell the product. Nothing like that. Both of them should be able to freely trade. Freely trade. The same way, in the same case, if I want to even go for an individual transaction, the same case, let us take the same example, let us keep having the same example so that students understand. A wishes to sell his car to B, like the same for 1 lakh rupees. So A cannot force B to buy the car. At the same time, B cannot force A to sell the car. Both of them should be willing, free, likely, happily execute the transaction. There cannot be any force, physical use of threat, violence, etc. on either one. So, free consent is one of the essential element for the agreement to enter into the contract. Again, like capacity to contract, there are 3 exceptions. The same way, for free consent, there are exceptions. There are 5 exceptions here for free consent. One is coercion. The second is undue influence. Third is mistake. Fourth is fraud. Fifth is misrepresentation. Coercion, undue influence, mistake, fraud, misrepresentation. So these are the 5 important exceptions to the general rule of legals. When you come to coercion, there was a popular case law which had happened in the Indian around the Punjab region or something. Chikkamammi Raju versus Sheshamma. In this case, what happened is coercion is one of the popular thing where a person who is forcing his wife and her son to execute a release deed in favor of his brother. They were under the influence of getting killed because the person who is forcing his wife and her child used his knife and was forcing him to execute a release deed. But what happened is the wife and the child fought the moment executed the deed and they ran away from the home. They have been put to the court and the court handled this case and they said that wife could execute this, wife would always try to avoid this contract because they are under the force or they are under the influence of physical threat. Because without a physical threat, they are never even ready to execute a release deed in favor of the husband's brother. But now they were under the use of threat. As a result of this, they are forced to execute the release deed. Therefore, this release deed was held void and it would be cancelled as per the court order. So this is called coercion. So coercion is something which is use of physical threat or use of violence or use of some kind of external forces to put the parties under pressure and thereby compelling them to enter into the contract. Then comes undue influence. Undue influence is something which the law states under section 16, which is purely a kind of a moral influence where a person tries to enter into the mind of another person and they try to influence that person to enter into the contract. The best example would be doctors of today and the patients of today. For example, if I want to, if a patient goes to the hospital that I am having fever, where a doctor would always ask him to get thousands of tests done. For a fever, they used to take X-ray, MRI, etc. So what happens is, for this kind of stuff, where the client is of a weak-minded person, he may obviously go into get into thousands of tests, and he comes to the doctor, and the doctor says that, hey, I give you dose, obviously. But he is put under pressure, under moral pressure, taking the advice of expert doctor. Although the client says that he is an expert doctor, whatever he says I follow, obviously he will go into thousands of tests. So now, if you see the definition under the influence, it means that the person is trying to influence the mind of another person. That is, one person influencing mind of another person, getting into the mind of another person, and using that position to obtain unfair advantage over the other person. Here, doctor uses his position to obtain unfair advantage over the client because he puts him under thoughts of test. The test costs 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 rupees. He spends enormous amount of money, get the test done. Obviously, we all feel that the result of this should be good, but if the result of this should be bad, the doctor wins. He amasses lots of it. But if it should be good, fine. And again, he is put under pressure to do lots of tests. This is called undue influence. The same example holds good for a religious disciple and a guru who roots. For example, there is for a client is a weak-minded person, and he is having lots of problem in his life. He approaches a religious guru where that weak-minded client, when he says that I always have a problem, sir, when I drive a bike. I always have a problem when I am running my house. There are lots of bugs coming. There are lots of insects frequently coming. Obviously, what happens is when the client is getting into lots and lots of these personal problems, when he approaches a religious guru, what the religious guru will do? He will ask the client to do thousands of Ganpati puja, thousands of puja. They will put the client into lots of pressure. And what happens is because of the personal problems, they will end up amassing so much of expenses in doing puja, and this religious guru takes unfair advantage of the client and asks him to perform pujas, and obviously the client incurs lots of expenses. So these are the cases where undue influence is there. Another important aspect of undue influence is Vajid Khan case. In this case, what happened is there was a client who was influenced, was an old lady, she was an illiterate person. She has been asked with advocate to execute a property deed in favor of the advocate. But the old woman had to execute it because we believed that advocate was a popular and educated person. She had released to execute it, the property deed. The advocate had amassed the property, and the case went to the court. The woman filed a suit, and the court said that this is a clear case of undue influence because the advocate, having known the fact that the woman is illiterate, she had been unduly influenced, and he had taken unfair advantage over the lady because of her illiteracy, and she had fraudulently induced her. So that is the case of undue influence, Vajidlan case. And the next is Pardanas in women. Another important aspect of undue influence is Pardanas in women. For a Muslim category, right, in this case, what happens is they used to generally wear a black dress as per their Muslim customs. The ladies, they are not supposed to meet. They observe complete seclusion from the society. They observe complete distance from the men people or either from the society. They will not talk to such people, you also know, right? So those are the categories called Pardanas in women. So law specifically puts a small provision under undue influence under section 16b, which talks about Pardanas in women contracts. The person who enter into a contract with a Pardanas in women first have to ensure that if he wants to escape liability under the contract, if he wants to say that I don't want to get any case filed against me, he has to prove the three important aspects. The Pardanas in women, the lady is a Pardanas in women, point number one. The second is the contract has been completely read out, and he has to ensure that the Pardanas in women understands it clearly, language is clear, and she is able to make independent advice out of the contract, which means that she is able to form a rational judgment and she is able to understand the terms and conditions of the contract spelled out to her by the other party, and she is able to fully understand the terms and conditions, and she is giving her willingness only because of her. She is not influenced by the former party. That is a very important aspect. That is contract with Pardanas in women as per provisions of section 16. Okay. Then comes mistake. Third part is mistake. Under the law of the contract, which is a third exception to the free concept, mistake generally classified into mistake of law and mistake of fact. There are two categories: mistake of law, mistake of fact. Mistake of law generally does not recognize the person who is saying that I don't know the law. Law has to be known to every citizen of India if he is born as an Indian citizen. So, for example, if you are owner of a car or a bike, you should know the Motor Vehicles Act. You should know that you should be able to drive the contract. You should be able to drive the motor vehicle or the car as per the rules of the Indian traffic provisions. If you know that, you should know that you should validly hold a driving license issued by the RTO, Regional Transport Office. If you are not able to own it, but if you don't know the law, but you still drive a vehicle without license, you will be held and guarded under the provisions of Motor Vehicles Act by the Indian Traffic Police. Mistake of fact. What is mistake of fact? There is a fact that you pronounce, but what happens is you believe that fact to be true, but it is actually mistake. For example, A was selling 1,000 gallons of oil to B, but he felt that the oil is in a good condition. He felt it and he believed it, but also believed that there were 1,000 tons of oil in this factory. But what happened is, it ultimately ended up that 200 tons of oil was evaporated, and it was only 800 tons of oil in the factory. So it's a genuine mistake of fact, which he believes it to be a fact, but there is another mutual mistake that it is actually just a fault on his part. So in that case, law excuses it, but wants it, but don't make such mistake. Again, mistakes are classified into two, which is called unilateral mistake and bilateral mistake. When one of the parties to the contract under the mistake, but the other party is not under the mistake, it is called unilateral mistake, one party mistake. The second part is bilateral mistake, where both the parties under mutual mistake as to fact. Obviously, the contract is void because both the parties are under a common mistake. If one of them knows under mistake, the other party knows it, probably there is an opportunity for correction. Because the other party would tell the former party, hey, you have made a mistake, so you need to correct this, so we need to enter into mutual agreement. Because based on the advice of the other party, the former party would correct it and they enter into agreement. There is always a chance of correction. But in the case of bilateral mistake, there is no such chances. Because both the parties are under mutual mistake. Obviously, this is the result of consensus added. Second point, and this bilateral mistake will be correlated because consensus added. What I say is, both the parties do not example, if the Kamal Hans and Raj Hans case, where A was selling Kamal Hans, whereas B was thinking he is buying Raj Hans. Both Kamal Hans and Raj Hans are white horses, but A is explicitly selling Kamal Hans, whereas B, the buyer, thought he is buying Raj Hans. There is no thought at all. Here there should be unique minded among the seller and the buyer. Both of them should be of the view they are buying the same product, same horse. That is Kamal Hans. But in this case there is a difference. Obviously, this is a result of bilateral mistake. Okay. Then comes fraud. Section 17 of the Indian Contract Act says fraud. What is fraud? When I make a statement, there are three important aspects here which a person has to observe when making a statement. When I make a statement, the purpose of the statement is such that it is tending to deceive the other person. For example, if I say I am the representative of a big house, I am going to sell 1,000 kgs of a big value clocks to you. But in fact, the purpose of such statement is only to induce other person to enter into the contract, nothing else. But the statement itself is false. I know it is false. And I am going to pronounce it for the purpose of inducing other person to buy my product. Here you need to understand, when the statement is false and having known it is false, I am still pronouncing the statement and I am forcing which obviously results in the other party induced by making such a representation and is willing to buy the product. So obviously I am inducing the other person based on my false statement to enter into a contract with me, which is called fraud. The only difference between fraud and misrepresentation under section 17 and section 18 is that the difference between fraud and misrepresentation is that when I make a statement, the statement itself is false and I know it is false, but I am still pronouncing for the purpose of inducing the buyer to enter into the contract, right? This is the fraud. Whereas in the case of misrepresentation under section 18, I make a statement, but I believe it to be true, okay, but in fact it is not true. But I believe it to be true. To the honest sense of mind, I believe it to be true. I still make a pronouncement that the statement is true, but subsequently, apparently, it happens to be false. It is not my mistake because I believe it to be true. So that is a misrepresentation. So what are the effects of such? So all these 5 exceptions: coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation and mistake. Except for fraud, which is a clear case of a fraudulent activity. The rest of the 4, that is coercion, undue influence, mistake and misrepresentation. These 4 cases, the party who is injured by such a statement. For example, in the coercion, the person is under influence of threat. The husband forced the wife to execute the release deed. So wife is under the influence of threat. Because if he doesn't execute the release deed, she will be killed. Okay, so party who is fearing the wife who is under the influence of threat. So she can avoid the contract. Avoid means she can come out of the contract and say that no, I am not ready to execute the contract with you. It is a case of voidable. Undue influence also, the party who is injured. Under the law, injured party or aggrieved party or affected party, you can use any terms. Injured, aggrieved, affected. So either of these 3 terms, party who is affected, injured or aggrieved can avoid the contract. Under mistake also the same thing. Misrepresentation is also the same thing. Whereas in the case of fraud is one area where there is a purely fraudulent activity. The purpose is deceiving the other party to enter into the contract. Therefore, for fraud alone, the party who is injured or affected or aggrieved can take 2 courses of action. One is to avoid the contract and also second is to file a suit claiming damages. Because if I were free, if I were not under the influence of fraud, without your fraudulent statement, I would have absolutely not entered into the contract. But because of your fraudulent statement, I was induced to enter into the contract and I put into trouble. So for doing so, you will have to compensate me for the damages by way of compensation. So for which case, you will be filed a suit in the court of law claiming for fraud compensation. So fraud alone we have 2 remedies, which is avoiding the contract, normal remedy. Second is suit But other than that fraud, for the rest of the four, as I said, coercion, influence, mistake and misrepresentation, the affected party can avoid the contract. Therefore, in this free consent, all these five categories, it is a clear case of voidable contract. That is why we call it as voidable contract. Because as per the definition of voidable contract under Indian Contract Act, as per the first class what we discussed, the contract which is voidable or avoidable or cancelable or coming out at the option of one of the parties but not at the option of other or others is a voidable contract as per definition. So here one of the parties who is ready to avoid the contract is the injured party, because obviously he is the sufferer. So injured party can avoid the contract and come out of the contract and say that no, I am not ready to execute further this contract. So he is trying to avoid the contract. So it's a clear case of voidable contract. Right? The next sixth point, what we are going to continue as a part of this topic is as a part of essential element of valid contract. Sixth point is legal relationship. Here the popular case law which I want to quote here, which probably you can also make down, is the example case which is Balfour versus Balfour. Balfour versus Balfour. Here what happened is that the husband who was in Sri Lanka, right? He wanted to take his wife to England or London country for the purpose of some job, right? So what happened is he had to transfer to London along with his wife, but they were living happily. But during the course of their living, the wife contracted a certain disease. She became ill. So the husband had to leave to again back to Sri Lanka because his employment got transferred. But he had promised his wife to be paid certain maintenance amount, okay, for which purpose he continued to agree to pay, but he also continued to pay. But as per the terms and conditions of the maintenance agreement, for certain period he paid and then he stopped. The wife filed a case in the court of law stating that this particular maintenance amount has to be continuously paid. But what happened is, the case said that, the court said that this is purely a husband-wife relationship, it is purely personal relationship. Agreements of such personal domestic nature cannot come to the contract or come to the court of law. It is something which is only legal relationship defined contracts can come to the court, not personal domestic contracts. Therefore, as a part of Balfour case, we infer the terms and conditions of the contract has to be purely and purely able to define legal relationship between the parties. You cannot always have a personal relationship defined in the contract. Obviously, the second and foremost important aspect of this topic is that whenever such contracts go to the court should be able to accept it as an evidence and pronounce the legal judgment. But in this case, it is something because husband and wife may quarrel today, they will live happily differently, right? Obviously, a father and son can quarrel today, they may be happy tomorrow. So another popular small example is that a father and a son were living happily in a house. The father said to the son that if you pass CICW exams, I will give you 1 lakh rupees. Okay, father promised the son, I will give you 1 lakh rupees. But son father said, oh, he was ready and he happily studied all throughout the night, keeping coffee table, everything. He studied and he passed the exam, CA exam in single attempt. Then he pronounced, went to the father and said that, hey father, give me 1 lakh because you promised me that I passed when I passed CA exam. Now I passed, see the result, give me 1 lakh. Father refused to pay the amount. So the son filed a case against the father in the court of law, stating that there is a violation of the terms of the contract. So what happened is the court said that it is purely a personal relationship between the father and the son. It is purely out of love and affection. There can be never such contracts at all. So the agreements should be such of nature, you should be able to define legal relationship between the parties. Personal domestic relationship will not be a part of this contract. Next part is agreement not to be declared void. So whenever we make out an agreement, it should be obvious legally enforceable. You cannot have an agreement which can be declared void, or you cannot have such agreement as not tenable, not legally acceptable. Such agreements will obviously be void. Best example is, as I said, an agreement with a minor, so agreement with an incompetent person, agreement with a lunatic, agreement with an idiot, agreement with a drunken intoxicated person. Obviously, they will not be able to understand the terms and conditions of the contract when you enter into a contract with them, when you enter into an agreement with them. When you say, you go to a lunatic, you go to a drunken person, he will be under the influence of drug. So obviously when you say, sir, I wish to give you a motorcycle for 1 lakh rupees. He said, yeah, just go and get it. So obviously he will be under the influence of credit and it will be okay for entering into the contract. Next day, we say, we got a basic approach. Obviously next day we say that we will never say, we will come and say that, oh, you came to me, you offered me motorcycle, I don't know. Because at the time he was saying yes, he was under the influence of credit. Next day, his drug is over, he is back to normal, he will not even understand, he will not even remember the terms that you pronounced to me last week. Obviously what happens is, there is a thing, right? So agreements not declared void. So agreement should be such a nature, it should not be explicitly or implicitly declared void. It should be legally acceptable, it cannot be cancelable. Next point is certainty of performance. See here as I told yesterday, there was a person A, right? He promised to pay B 3 lakhs rupees to B, saying that if B takes A to the space is, as you say, it is a space station, it is in a galaxy or a satellite area. He wants to take it there and he wants to live there for 10 days and come back. For doing so, A is going to pay B 3 lakhs rupees as if B is a travel agent to the space. This is a funny thing. So now, obviously it is very difficult for a person to take a person to the space station. Space is somewhere in the galaxy, it is in the universe. We cannot go less like that going to Kumbakonam, Tiruchi or any other place, right? So, for paying an amount of 3 lakhs, the performance, is it certain? Is it possible? No. Because traveling to space is totally impossible. Your health condition has to be there. There has to be 6 months fitness program you have to understand. You have to undertake. Only when you are fit it is possible. If you are not fit it is not possible. So there are certain steps involved. There are formalities involved which is totally impossible to do. Where the agreement which is there which is totally impossible to do and for which the person is paying consideration to do an impossible act, such agreement is void. Therefore, the performance under the contract should be certain and possible of performance. Then legal formalities. Last is legal formalities. The last and the ninth point, which is very, very important for an agreement to venture into contract, is legal formalities. What is legal formalities? Contract has to be in writing. It has to pronounce clearly the terms and conditions of the contract. The person who is entering into the contract, his rights, his duties, his obligations, his responsibilities, his tasks defined under the contract in a clear manner. Person who is accepting the terms and conditions of the contract, the acceptor side, he should be able to understand the terms and he should be able to give his consent, the contract, etc. And both of them should sign the contract, both of them should understand the terms and conditions of the contract. The contract paper has to be stamped and there has to be proper witness, which is 2 or 3 witnesses as a part of signaturing the transaction and the contract, stating that this contract is personally witnessed by so and so, by 2 or 3 witnesses who should signature the transaction and saying that this particular transaction is vouched by us. Yes, on this particular day, on this particular time, there were 2 parties who entered into an agreement and this agreement is, yes, perfectly witnessed and executed. So, as I said, all these 9 elements of the contract has to be absolutely fulfilled in order to, for an agreement to have matured into the contract. Right? That is very, very important aspect or element which is there. Right? So this is another important thing which you need to be very, very clear. So as I said, what are the 9 points? Offer, acceptance, consensus ad idem, then lawful consideration, then capacity of the parties. Again, within capacity of the parties, that is a general rule. There are exceptions. What are the exceptions? Minor, persons incompetent to contract, like lunatics, insolvents, idiots, drunken, intoxicated persons. And the persons, third category, disqualified by law, which are obviously insolvents again, and then ambassadors, then convicts, governments, corporations, etc. They are people who cannot enter into the contract. Then the fourth is, as I said, fourth is capacity to contract exception. Fifth is free consent. Consent has to be free, that is a general rule. Again, there are exceptions. Coercion, undue influence, misrepresentation, fraud, mistake. These are the 5 important exceptions. Coercion, Chikam Amiraju versus Seshappa case law. Undue influence, Majid Khan case. Fraud, derive versus speak is there. Misrepresentation, again derive versus speak is there. And mistake, we have Great Atlantic travel risk versus Great Atlantic Pacific versus travel risk salvage. Great Atlantic Pacific versus travel risk salvage. These are the 5 important case laws which are under the respective topics. Okay. This is the exceptions under free consent. Sixth point is, as I said, which is there in the board, legal relationship, welfare versus welfare. Agreements of domestic personal nature cannot be contracts. Only such contracts which give rise to legal relationship, be capable of enforcing in the court of law, acceptable by the court of law as a contract, as agreement. It is said to be legally defined relationships, which is very important essential element of the agreement to mature into the contract. Then agreements not declared void. What is agreement not declared void? Agreements which should never be declared void, which should always be valid. It should always be valid. Then comes certainty of performance. What is certainty of performance? Agreement should always be certain, definite and capable of performance. Agreement to do impossible act, which is said to be not acceptable. And last is legal formalities. As I said, it is signature, forms, terms and conditions, stamp and press. Let's finish this topic. If you have doubts, please get back. Thanks.